I'm going to talk more in detail of our pre-publication checks. So this appears after you have submitted your manuscript with us. What happens next? So we want to ensure that our authors are aware of where your paper goes through and what your paper goes through once you submit on F1000. So it's important for everyone to understand. Now, this is how our editorial workflow looks like. So the editorial process is made up of 3 stages. The first stage is pre-publications. The second stage is production stage. And the third stage is peer review stage. Now, each stage is managed by its own dedicated team. So we will be primarily focusing in on stages 1 and 3, which is the peer review and the pre-publication stage, not the production stage. So just moving ahead in the pre-publication stage. So what happens in the pre-publication stage? In the beginning, with the first of these stages, pre-publication checks will be performed to your article. Now, any one of you who is going to submit on F1000 through IIRB must be aware of what are the checks so that you can align your manuscript accordingly. So these checks are carried out by our pre-publication team. So we have a dedicated team who perform these pre-publication checks. They are responsible for ensuring that articles adhere to F1000 guidelines and policies, which are informed by international publishing standards. So the pre-publication team will liaise with the authors throughout the process via email and advise you of any issues which they may come across and the stage of your paper. So once you submit your paper, you will receive an email from somebody from the pre-publication team if there are any concerns with the paper or if they need any clarification. So they will email you, they will ask you some questions. And then once you respond to those comments, if the editor or if the pre-publication team does not have any further questions, then your paper is conditionally accepted and sent to the production team. So some of the initial checks that are applied through the pre-publication team. So they will make an initial assessment of the paper to ensure that there are no major concerns. Once the article has passed the initial assessment, F1000 will lightly copy edit the article. So we perform just the light copy editing. However, we do not perform any in-house copy editing services. So you have to ensure that your article is written in clear and plain English. We also ensure that it adheres to our article guidelines and policies. Now, at this point, the article may be sent back to the author requesting some changes before accepting the article. Now, once the article has been accepted by us, it is moved to the production stage for typesetting and publishing, and then followed by the peer review. So these are the steps that happens after the pre-publication stage. Now, regarding the initial assessment of an article on F1000Reserch, now this is also important to remember. We will assess the originality of the paper, the author criteria, language, data availability, and ethics of any submission. So you can see on the screen, you have all these icons that depict what are the initial assessment checks that we perform. And so concerning originality, we use a software, plagiarism detection software called Authenticate, which is used to screen all the articles, and articles with large paragraphs of plagiarism and also self-plagiarism will be rejected. So if you are copying any material from your previously published article, you need to reference it and cite it, otherwise it will fall under plagiarism. Now, with regards to the author criteria, all authors should meet the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, which is ICMJE criteria for authorship, and an author's contribution should be detailed by selecting the credit taxonomy. So if any one of you have submitted on F1000, you can see that we follow the credit taxonomy, wherein each author will be given credit to the kind of work they have put in the manuscript. Now, for the language check, you may be asked to have your article professionally copy edited if it is not readable or if the quality of the language impedes its understanding. So we want the team to understand the article, only then the community will also be able to understand it. However, a light copy edit will be provided by the pre-publications team. All articles must have a data availability statement, even when there is no data associated with the article. But we will highlight this more so shortly when we will discuss the open data policy as well. And then finally, we have ethics check, which requires that all articles should have an ethical approval for human and animal studies, and also consent statement for human studies if applicable. Ethical approval statement should include approval committee name, approval number, and date of approval. So three things you have to include in ethical statement: approval committee name, number, and date of approval. If ethics or consent were waived or not applicable, a statement should be included to detail why. Now, in order to avoid delays, we would always recommend checking an article or our manuscript checklist before submitting to the platform to minimize the potential follow-up work for the author. So if you are aware of all of the things that I'm talking about right now, it will be very easy and very rapid for you to go through these stages because you're already aware of what to do and what not to do. Now, moving on to the overview of the editorial requirements, we've already talked about the pre-publication checks. I will also talk in more detail of what are the various things that the pre-publication team checks for, and then we'll go through ethical and consent requirements and then data policy. Now, as mentioned earlier, what is our purpose to perform such a in-depth pre-publication check is because we publish before peer review. We have to ensure that each article meets a certain standard. Now, this means checking if the article is readable, reproducible, adheres to ethical standards or not. These checks are more substantial than any other publisher require at this point. But we do this because we publish before peer review, and we want to provide readers and those who will be invited to review your paper with as much assurance around the credentials of your work at this early stage. So that is why there is such an in-depth pre-publication checks. So I've already gone through this in the previous slide, what are the requirements for the process of pre-publication check. So authors, after you submit your manuscript with F1000, you will be emailed with an initial decision and comments to address. So if your paper is accepted or rejected, you will get to know about it. Rejection does not mean that you cannot resubmit on F1000. So what happens is, if your paper is rejected with F1000, the editor will provide comments on why they are rejecting your paper. So you might not have your data availability statement, or you might not have declared the data openly, or you might not have your ethics statement or consent statement. So under some reasons, you might receive a rejection email, but you can always get all the information that the editor has asked for and resubmit your paper. So that is how the rejection policy works for us. So don't feel discouraged if you receive a rejection email. That is an opportunity for you to rework on your paper and resubmit it with us. Right. So once author will respond to all the comments, they will return the revisions. If any major comments are outstanding, we will contact the authors again. And once everything is addressed, we will prepare the article for typesetting and will send to the production team. Now I've already talked about what we check for, so I'm just going to move to the next slide. Some of the other things apart from originality, language, and authorship, we also check for the reporting guidelines, and that our reported study must meet all applicable research and publication standards. So this includes adhering to reporting guidelines, ensuring that ethical approval is clearly stated, and adhering to our data availability policy. Now, this is an example of an ethical approval that I talked about for all the studies involving humans. Now, when I say humans, I mean anything from drug experimentation to interviews to online surveys. We do require an ethical approval statement. Now, ethical approval should have been obtained prior to the study being conducted, not after that. You may also need to apply for ethical approval for certain animal studies. Now, if you did not need ethical approval for your study, you will need a clear statement that explains why your study did not require that you obtain ethical approval. Ethical approval is also required in social sciences research as well. So if you are submitting a survey or an interview or a questionnaire or anything that involves data from humans, online or in person, it needs to have an ethical approval. Now on your screen, you can see a very good example of how an approval looks like. So it has the name of university, the ethical clearance committee protocol number, and all the other necessary information that is required, the review board name, permit number, and such. So this is one example how you can write your ethical approval statement. Now, for human studies, we also require that consent to participate has been sought from all participants. You should include a consent statement in your article to detail that you have obtained consent and what type of consent you have obtained. Is it written or is it verbal? If you're publishing identifiable data, you will need to have obtained consent to publish from the participants. Now you can see some examples here that it says that informed consent was gained by detailing the purpose of the study and strategies to ensure the participants' anonymity and confidentiality. So this is one example. And then in the second box, you can say it says that written informed consent for the creation and publication of this report was received from the patient. So this is how your consent statement looks like. And if the participants in your study are minors, that means that they're children or cannot otherwise give consent. That means that they have reduced mental capacity. You still must obtain a written consent from a parent or a legal guardian. Now, this is a very exhaustive checklist of the pre-publication stages. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I'll be happy to circulate this amongst the researchers in case it will help you to structure your paper. So for example, for plagiarism, the acceptable percentage is 30%. And then 10% from individual sources. And then we use authenticate for that. Abstract should not exceed more than 300 words. So all of this information you can check out on our website, as well as I'll be happy to share this initial checklist with you. Now, this is a manuscript checklist for F1000Reserch. It excludes data and software availability here. It is split into 5 sections. What are the various sections that are there in your manuscript? So the first one is front matter, then you have main body, then declarations, back matter, and data and software availability, which I have not include here. So each of these criteria must be approved by our editorial team prior to publication. And it is these checks which assign so much value to papers published on F1000Reserch, right? So I'm not going to speak about all of these points in detail, but you can see how important it is. So you should have your title, your author list, or your main body should have a proper structure. The grammar and language should be proper. You should have all the reporting and ethical guidelines in place. The various declarations like consent, competing interest, your grant information should be provided. You should have an acknowledgement section in your manuscript. And then the final is back matter. So all the references and bibliography, figures, tables, any supplementary files, all of this information should be provided. So this is how a holistic manuscript looks like, right? Now, quickly moving to our open data guidelines and policies. So F1000 F1000 has a mandate for open data. So all the authors need to declare their data openly unless a valid exemption applies, which I'm going to show in a couple of slides. What are those exemptions? There are a number of elements which aim to make this data, which is shared alongside published article, accessible and reusable. Now, to ensure that the data is accessible, we require a data availability statement explaining how that data can be accessed, and that must be stored in a data repository. Reusable data must be openly licensed. So CC BY license is usually one of the most common licenses for open access. Data should ideally be shared in a way that it complies by our data principles, which you can also find on our website. We also want the data creators to get credit for their data. So data sets should be cited in the body of article wherever relevant and added to the reference list or bibliography. Now, all of these requirements are checked pre-publication. The data sets will be accessed and assessed by the peer reviewers also as part of their evaluation of the research post-publication. Now, how and what is a data repository and how can you deposit the data there? A data repository is a location on the web for your data to be stored and accessed. So in order for you to share your data openly, you need to use a repository, which is basically like a Google Drive, a hub for you to share your data. But that data will be unique to you. It will have a DOI. So if anyone checks your data or if anyone is looking at your data, they will need to cite it. So the authors will get credit for each citation any other researcher makes to make their data accessible, right? So the repository provides a fixed location online for your data to be stored and accessed, and also enables you to link your article directly to your output for context and transparency when publishing your research. So what happens is that your article is linked to your data and your data is linked to your article. So both of them are reciprocally connected and you receive credit for your work in making both of these accessible, right? Some of the examples of repositories that are common and recommended by F1000 are Figshare, which is very easy to use, accepts all kinds of data. Then you have Triad, Zenodo, and NCBI. So these are some of the repositories that you can check out. For the open data, this is how the data section of manuscript submission looks like. So it will ask you, first it will give you information on what kind of data we ask for. So is it underlying data or extended data? Underlying data means that all articles that report original results must include details of how the raw underlying data can be accessed by the peer reviewers. And then you have the extended data, which is supplementary data. So whichever data you are declaring and how you're doing so. So over here, you can see that there are two questions. Have you prepared your data to share with your peer reviewers and future readers? So if you click on yes, then it will ask you all of the information regarding where you have stored your data. It will ask you to put the URL of your DOI, ask you to name the repository, for example, Figshare, then authors' names, and then it will ask you to give a license to your study. Now, if you're not sure what kind of license you should provide, you can always reach out to the editorial and reconfirm there always. And my team is also there to help and support the readers and the researchers, right? The second point says that no, none of my data can be shared or I did not use the data. So if you click on this, it will take you to some valid exemptions that are applicable, but you need to explain why you are asking for an exemption and if your it falls under your data exemption or not as well. So you need to check for it, right? If your particular study falls under the data exception or not. So just moving on. So this was how our page looks like as far as it comes to data. Now, when do these open data checks happen? After the author submits the article, while the editorial is checking, the pre-publication team is checking for your article at the pre-pub stage, that's when the editorial checks for policy compliance also happens. So open data comes under the compliance F1000 policy and mandates, right? So that's where your checks will happen before the article is made public and before the peer review process starts. Now, what are the pre-publication checks for open data? Number one is that data must be shared for all the articles unless a valid exemption applies, which I'm going to show in the next slide. What are the valid exemptions? Data must be available in one of our F1000 recommended data repositories with an open license, so CC0 or CC BY license, which should be applied, and a persistent identifier, which is a DOI. All articles must include a data availability statement describing how the data can be accessed. Now, what is a data availability statement and what it looks like? This is an example of data availability statement. Every article should have a DAS, which is a data availability statement, even if there is no data. Now, where does it come? After your paper is published online, after the conclusion section of your paper or the discussion section of your paper, false the data availability. So you can see that this particular author whose data set it belongs to has described the underlying data, extended data, as well as reporting guidelines. So in underlying data, you can see that even though there is no data, they still have declared that all data underlying the results are available as part of the article and no additional source data is required. So that's what it means when we say that every article should have a DAS, even if there is no data. So it's just one simple one line that no data was associated with this article. For extended data, the author has provided all the details, which you can see with the DOI. So that doi.org URL will take you to a data set hosted in a repository from where you can access and download and cite the data for this particular study. So this is an example of the data availability statement. Now, what are the exemptions for open data? While F1000 has an open data policy, we will consider some valid exemptions, and we acknowledge that there could be some reasons why you cannot share your data openly. Now, some of the examples are authors who did not generate or use data which cannot be shared for ethical or security reasons, for example, to protect the privacy of research participants, data set which are too large to upload to a repository, or data which is owned by third party, which was reused by the author. So even if all of these 4 exemptions are applicable to you, or any one of these is applicable to you, you still need to provide a data availability statement explaining why they have not shared their data openly, right? So as I mentioned earlier, DAS has to be written even if you just say one line that there is no data associated with this article. Now, this takes me to the last section of my presentation, which is peer review criteria on F1000Reserch. So just quickly giving you an overview of what our peer review is and how to check reviewers from our open and transparent peer review model. So what is the criteria? Our criteria is that the reviewers should be qualified, which means that they should typically hold a doctorate, a PhD, MD, MBBS, or an equivalent degree. Exceptions will be made for scholarly disciplines where doctorates are not necessary, for example, education or literary sciences, or when an individual has a demonstrable public record of expertise. Now, if possible, when a reviewer's suggestion is rejected due to lack of qualification, the editorial team will suggest that their principal investigator or supervisor is invited instead, and the original person can take the role of a co-reviewer. So we also have a possibility of co-reviewing the paper if you as a reviewer do not qualify to review the paper solely. Now, the reviewers must be experts in the field. So reviewers should have published at least 3 articles as a lead author in a relevant topic, with at least 1 article having been published in the last 5 years. In fields where a reviewer's expertise is not typically measured by their publication record, or if suggested reviewers' expertise is publicly demonstrable in ways other than their publishing record, for example, their LinkedIn page or their institutional page, please provide an evidence of their suitability by emailing the editorial team. The reviewers should be impartial. That means they should not have any competing interest that can bias their assessment of the article. They should not be a close collaborator of author or personally associated with them. For example, a reviewer should not have co-authored with any of the lead authors. So if you are finding reviewers for your paper, make sure that they have not co-authored with you in the 3 years preceding publication of version 1, and have not co-authored with any of the lead authors since the publication of version 1 of your article, whichever article we are talking about here. And then currently you do not work in the same institution as authors or be a close collaborator with the author. The reviewers must also be global. So for any given article, we require that reviewers are from different institutions. So this does not apply to large multi-site institutions such as Max Planck or University of California. We also strongly encourage authors to suggest geographically diverse reviewers. So only 1 reviewer per country, and then you have to mention reviewers from geographically diverse locations to get a diverse perspective and international perspective on the article. If all the suggested reviewers are from the same institution, The editorial team may request that additional names of potential reviewers from different locations are provided, right? So these are the qualifications and criteria for the peer review process. Now, just to help the authors who are going to submit on F1000, where to find the reviewers for consideration on your article. Now, to help you identify suitable reviewers, we've compiled a list of methods. The authors of the references cited in your article can be a good starting point for finding reviewers working in your specific field. Searching, abstracting, and indexing databases such as Google Scholar, PubMed, Web of Science, and Scopus, or any other subject-specific literature database for recent articles with specific keywords can also help you identify authors currently working in the same field, such as yourself, and who you may be suitable to review your article. As an expert in your area of research, you will likely be aware of prominent academic centers whose staff may be suitable to review your article. So you can try searching their website for potential reviewers. You can also search for specific experts with whom you have no recent collaboration, as they or their postdocs may be suitable to review. You can also use journal name estimator and other similar tools to help identify authors who have published related articles. Now, for F1000 to assist authors in identifying suitable reviewers, we also provide a tool called Reviewer Finder tool. So our algorithm analyzes the submission and provides a ranked list of reviewer candidates based on leading authors of related publications. Authors can access this tool via Suggest Reviewers link next to the submitted and published article in the submission section in My Account. So once you have submitted your paper, only then you will, and if it is published or accepted for publication, only then you can use the link. This is an automatically generated list of potential reviewers. So authors must use their own judgment to determine if the suggested reviewers have the appropriate expertise to review the article or not, right? So these were some of the ways in which you can find the reviewers, right? So just one do's and don'ts for the peer reviewers. I'm not going to go through the detail, but just ensure that the suggested reviewers are experts in your field. You can contact us if you have any questions. Please do not contact your suggested reviewers directly at any time for any reason. I cannot state it enough that if you are in direct contact with your reviewer, that review report will fall under peer review manipulation and we will not be publishing that report. So it's very important that you only provide us the names and let the peer review team coordinate on your behalf to the reviewers. So the authors and reviewers should never be in direct contact with each other, right?